Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me just. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Spencer Pack, and I work with Dr. Grover in the Department of Bioengineering. And today I'll be telling you about how I turned music into density. But first, I want to talk about fraudulent foods. They are foods that are generally considered impure or unsafe to eat, and it costs the global food industry anywhere between 10 to $15 billion per year to fight this problem. Eating some of these foods can afflict consumers with mild to life-threatening conditions, such as diarrhea, skin diseases, and peptic ulcers. Now, for my project, I wanted to focus on milk because of its various nutritional benefits and its importance to child development. It has been found that 68% of milk in developing areas is adulterated in one way or another. And this can occur by adding, removing, or substituting various ingredients in the milk. People can dilute it with water, they substitute the natural fats in milk for vegetable oil, or sometimes they even add melamine, a chemical used to make plastic. And here on the right, I have an image of 3 samples of milk. Can you tell which ones have been diluted with a little bit of water? I bet you couldn't. It turns out the two on the left have been diluted with some water, and just goes to show that it's not very easy to tell at first glance whether or not your milk has been adulterated. And this whole adulteration of milk problem is not new either. For example, in 2008, Chinese manufacturers added melamine to baby formula, and as a result, thousands of Chinese babies were hospitalized. In August of 2019, 2 people in India were arrested for selling adulterated milk products. And in July of the same year, Indian scammers were arrested for making fake milk out of paint and shampoo. That's definitely something you do not want to drink. And again, this is just such a big problem that continues to affect people every single day. And if we can give these people a way to determine whether or not the milk has been tampered with, then we could probably save millions of lives every year. But how would we go about doing that? Well, everything in this world has something called density associated with it. And if we could just compare the density of the authentic stuff to the fake stuff, then maybe we can save people from drinking this adulterated milk. But how are we going to do that? Well, my lab wants to use music as a solution. This is because current technologies for measuring density are very expensive, and they require significant skill to manufacture and use. So our solution is to turn musical instruments into sensors for density. This is because music is a universal language and is understood by all those around the world. And here on the left, I have an example of what one of these typical density meters look like. And it can cost anywhere between $2,000 to $30,000. And this is just not feasible for people in developing areas. On the other hand, my lab previously developed a sensor inspired by the mbira, a 1,000-year-old finger piano from Africa, and it cost just about $1. And how it works is you have this metal tube here. You would push a fluid through this tube and then pluck it, creating a sound. You can then record that sound using a smartphone and upload it to a computer where you can do a little bit of math to then calculate back the density of the liquid that was inside. That math is called the Euler-Bernoulli beam theory. It allows us to connect the resonance frequency of the device to the density of liquid that was inside of it. And so with this knowledge, I asked the question, how can we turn tuning forks into density sensors? Well, we did this by 3D printing these hollow tuning forks and making them hollow. These devices are very cost effective, they're accurate and sensitive, and like most musical instruments, they're very easy to use and understand. Here in panel A, I have an image of what one of these tuning forks looks like being made. It is made out of polylactic acid or PLA. And this is a very common material that most 3D printers use. In B, you can see how you would fill up the tuning fork. The little opening up top where you can just pour whatever sample you want. And to use it, you would just hold it at the two ends here and pinch it at the prongs and release very quickly to create a sound, or a ping as we like to call it. The sound is then recorded on a smartphone and then uploaded to a computer where we analyzed it using custom Python code. And here is what one of these pings looks like. You can see it's about 4 seconds long and it decays very quickly after that initial hit. But it does not really tell us anything about the frequency of the tuning fork. To find that, we employed something called an FFT, or a fast Fourier transform, and that will give us that frequency that the tuning fork was ringing at. And in this example, it's about 67.87 hertz. And so with that, you can then plug it back into the Euler-Bernoulli beam theory and then calculate the density of the liquid that was inside. So why would we want to create this tuning fork when we already have a working Imbira sensor? Well, it all comes down to the material properties of the device and how it affects the device sensitivity and its fabrication difficulty. And more specifically, I'll be looking at density and the Young's modulus, which, if you don't know, is a measure of how elastic a material is. The Imbira that we previously made was made out of steel, and steel is very, very dense and also has a very high Young's modulus. So it goes somewhere up here in this chart. So because it's so stiff, it's not very easy to make devices out of, and it's not feasible for people in developing areas to go and bend rods of metal to create instruments out of. And because it's so dense, its overall mass contribution will greatly affect your measurements. You're going to have to use up a lot more sample to get the same kind of measurement than if you use something that was a lot less dense. You might end up measuring the density of the steel instead of the sample that you want. On the other hand, PLA is all the way down here. It is a lot less stiff and is also a lot less dense, making it very easy to make devices out of. And because it's less dense, its overall mass contribution will not really affect your measurements too drastically. So knowing that, we decided to print one tuning fork with a length of 165 millimeters, and we tested it against various NaCl solutions ranging from 1.00 to 1.08 grams per milliliter in density. And what we found was this nice downward linear trend. And it makes sense because the more dense something is, the heavier it is, so the lower the frequency that it should ring at. And this looked very promising. So we decided to print out a lot more tuning forks, this time going all the way down to 75 millimeters. Now, which one should we go with to measure our milk width? To make things a little easier to compare, I've scaled the y-axes. So now we can compare them a little bit more easily. On one hand, you have the 75 millimeter, which is the most sensitive, as you can tell by the slope. But because it was so short, it was really, really hard to get a good sound out of it because the prongs were super stiff. On the other hand, the 165 millimeter was the easiest to use because it was so long, but its sensitivity is not quite as high as the 75 millimeter. So we had to go with something in between, which is the 85 millimeter. That one was still pretty easy to use. It created some relatively good sounds, and it was also quite sensitive compared to the other ones. And to just quickly demonstrate what I mean by like a good sound, you can see the 165 millimeter has a really, really clean ping with that nice decay and good length, so you can hear it for a long time. On the other hand, the 75 millimeter had a really, really short ping, and you can see that the hit was not very, very good. It's quite messy up top. And that's why we decided to go with something in between, the 85 millimeter. This is just what we saw in general. Not all the pings look like this for each tuning fork, but this is what we saw for most of them. And so with the 85 millimeter, we can go on to create this histogram. And using the histogram, we can calculate the resolution of our tuning fork. This graph was made just by using air and ringing it for about 100 times. And so the Imbira that we created before has a resolution of 0.0063 grams per milliliter. The tuning fork has a resolution of 0.0045, and those $1,000 Anton par density meters have a resolution of 0.0015. So this makes our tuning fork about 1.5 times better than the Imbira that we previously made, and puts it roughly in the same ballpark as those $1,000 density meters, which is very impressive considering the tuning fork costs literal pennies to make. So now we can go on to talk about measuring milk density. If you don't know, the density of milk is about 1.02 to 1.025. Oh, and I need to mention that we got a bottle of whole milk and divided it up into different concentrations ranging from 50 to 100% by diluting it with some DI water. And so you can see that as we add more and more water, the density goes lower and lower and lower, closer to water, as you can tell by the 50% concentration here. And you can see the gradual increase as you go up. And it just goes to show that our tuning fork can indeed tell these 10% differences and can potentially be used in developing areas where milk is constantly being adulterated and differences in density between the authentic and the fake stuff is even greater than 10%. And so in conclusion, our 3D printed tuning forks offer an inexpensive alternative to traditional density sensors. The 85 millimeter tuning forks were the best for their good sensitivity and ease of use. Its resolution was 0.0045 grams per milliliter, and it can tell 10% differences between milk samples. And in the future, we want to try to use beat frequencies to eliminate electronics altogether. So get rid of the smartphone and the computer, just use your ear. We're hoping to publish our paper very soon in ACS Omega and explore other instruments that can be used as density sensors. And I've recently been looking at something called the Dan Moi, which is a Vietnamese folk instrument. And with that, I just want to thank the Grover Lab, especially my PI, Dr. Grover, and Hiran for all their help, not just on this project, but for the past 4 years I've been working with them. It's been amazing working at the Grover Lab, and Marky Starr and the NIH for supporting my project all the way. And with that, I'll be taking any questions.